Welcome to the first ever Subtle Beast Podcast After Show. I am at the studios of the Subtle Beast hosts, Matt and Steve, where I'm going to interview them, bring your questions live, and have an interactive session. We're going to start to break down shows. You're going to want to stay tuned. As promised, joining us from the studios of the Subtle Beast Podcast, your host, Steve N Foltz.
What's up, YouTube?
What's going on? It's very nice to be here tonight.
Are you guys understanding? This is the first ever after show.
We're super excited about it because we're pretty much giving up our, anonymity. Because we're always behind the mic. Now we're in front of the...
Everybody can see you now.
I
know that I'm one of your biggest fans. You've got a lot of fans out there. Your downloads are just on fire. You guys have been at this for, this is a question now for Steve. How many years have you guys been recording the show?
So we've been recording the show since 2014, barely. It was December of 2016. 17, 18, 19. So in December, we will have our 3-year anniversary.
Yep. So December of 2016 was when we actually launched onto iTunes, but... We were rehearsing, and
the concept came up, I think, in May.
Yeah, and all summer and all fall we worked on
our tech. The tech took a long time.
It was the hardest part.
So a lot has been made about your genre and the topics that you guys are conspiracy theorists. So, Steve, do you want to comment a little bit on the genre?
I honestly wouldn't consider us to be conspiracy theorists. No. A lot of the topics we do, I would think they're public service type of topics, like DuPont, things that are out there that are going to harm you, like 5G. What do you think about conspiracy theories?
Well, this is what I always like to say. If you break down what a conspiracy theory is, or what the definition is, it's just one is conspiring. And you have a theory on that. So we bring that to light. We're sharing what we believe and what others have brought to light. We do our investigation and we come up with what we think is a solid answer for a solid question.
I think that's great. I mean, it's just such an interesting genre, and you guys hit varied topics on every single episode. There seems to be no limits, but we'll talk about that in future shows coming up as well. So, question for Foltz to start out, and then if you guys just want to go from there. But, talk to me about the differences between Season 1 and Season 2.
Well, there would be a lot of large differences between
vast.
Season 1 and Season 2. Namely because, or number one, I would say, we weren't sure what direction we wanted to go. So we obviously started off in the genre that we are now, conspiracy theory, with the Mandela Effect. But we also did shows just based off of our area called What's So Great About Pennsylvania. We did one on recycling. We did one on cleanliness is next to godliness. We were testing
one of my favorites, by the way.
Thank you.
That's great. I mean, I think that was probably number 3 or 4.
It was early on when we did cleanliness.
But the numbers started to speak for themselves. When we were doing that genre, the genre that we're in, we saw our numbers were greater in that area, which excited me because that's the direction I wanted to go. That's where my main focus and energy was for this podcast. So I was hoping that it would get steered in that direction.
I got 2 things on that. One is the interaction between the audience and what Foltz and I do is really what drives us. So that is where the interaction it caught fire. Secondly, it's fun for us to talk about.
Sure.
And that kind of shows through when a subject is fun for us to talk about, and we can prep for hours and hours and record and take cuts and do the things that we need to do. If we're talking about a subject that we really don't have a passion for, it shows through in the end product. But when you
And it would never come to market.
when you have a subject that you feel something for,
Sure.
then that feeling comes through.
I mean, our topics are, you can take them any way you want. You can firmly believe. You can just look at it strictly as just entertainment. They are a lot of fun. I mean, who's ever sitting around a campfire looking up at the stars at night, starts talking about extraterrestrials, and someone says, that's a stupid topic, we should stop talking about it. I mean, it's just, have an open mind and have an open heart and just have a little bit of fun.
I agree.
So it's obvious to everybody who listens to the Subtle Beast podcast that you guys are not only passionate about the content, which we talked about in the earlier question, but you're also very passionate and dedicated to your research and show prep. Sure. So I think if we start with Steve, tell us a little bit about what goes into show prep.
Well,
Good luck.
Yeah, the show prep is one of the most fun parts of the entire thing, because you don't know what you're going to uncover about a topic. You've got the broad scope of it, but you don't know the intricacies yet. So as you're digging down into it, you just start to peel back the onion. You start to go deeper and deeper into this topic, and it becomes an obsession almost. And the more I find out, the more I text Foltz. The more Foltz finds out, the more he texts me back, to the point where we've had heated days with hundreds of texts back and forth, emails back and forth. And they start off, I would say there's been questions, or there's been topics on the board from the beginning.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So just to add on to what Steve was saying, so throughout that process, with us contacting each other, we end up compiling information that stacks yay high, which now we obviously know, if anybody that's in broadcasting knows how many hours this would be on tape or anything, on recording, that's got to be compiled down. So there's many different get-together rehearsals. Things are cut down to either an hour show, less than an hour show.
Some of the stuff you don't want to cut.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? We might be able to do like part twos of some, because we have so much extra information. But even on show day, on actual recording day, it's about a 6-hour day. It's between rehearsals, read-throughs, cuts, what's making the actual show, what went good in rehearsal, what didn't.
The pre-show is a long process.
It's an extremely long process, and it needs to be, because we pride ourselves on our show, and we're not going to put out a show that is less than stellar, in our opinion.
Absolutely. There's never been a show that has ended and I've thought to myself driving home, I wish we would have done it. I wish we would have gone down a different path, or gone down a different. By the time we get to the final cut, it is what we want it to be.
Exactly. And there's some times where I don't listen to the shows, and I'll just go based off of Steve. Steve, he used to have a long commute.
I would commute immediately after our studio time, listen to the show, and then immediately feed back to Foltz.
I would stay up to wait for him to get home, and he would say, it was fire. And that's all I needed to hear. I didn't need to listen to it. If someone would say, what did you guys talk about for that hour? Sometimes you can't remember because you're so in the zone and you've been doing so much prep for the show that you're just like, I don't know, I guess I would have to listen to it, which
right.
I do sometimes, but I tend not to.
It's the order of the minutia. Did we put this one first? Did we put this one first?
Yeah.
How do we segue from one smaller topic into
just the other night we had a
next?
similar. We were doing a read throw for a future show, and the show started off like this, and it ended up upside down. And this was the beginning, the middle was the end, and
That's why we number them. We page number every show.
You have to, because there's been you drop your notes sometimes.
Yeah, if you drop a 40 page set of notes without page numbers, it's going to take you 45 minutes to get them back to where you want them to go.
And then we'll fall out of the platform of being a family-friendly show.
Well, actually, it's great. Speaking of a family-friendly show, you guys mentioned on the very first Subtle Beast podcast that was your goal, that you pointed out to the audience that you are, in fact, a family-friendly show. So, Foltz, why don't you tell us a little bit about the vision there?
Well, our genre that is so interesting that a lot of people on their commute may not have an hour to cram into their schedule, or maybe in the morning they have a different routine. But with our podcast, if you have holiday vacation coming up, everyone travels for Thanksgiving, you have Christmas, whatever, summer vacation, and mom and dad like listening to Subtle Beast, well, they have no worries about putting it on in the car with the kids in the back with their phones and texting their friends. They don't have to worry about any type of profanity coming out. They don't have to worry about any type of sexual content being discussed. And they don't have to worry about anything that's really over PG rating.
Right.
Our podcast can be listened to anytime, whether your kids are in the room or whether they're not.
And hopefully at some point, because Foltz and I both have kids, and I know that your kids already do listen to it. My son is 5 years old, so at some point I'd like him to be able to listen to the show and not hear his dad being portrayed in a poor light.
And no offense to anybody that does use profanity on their podcast, but to us, we can get our point across without saying any of that.
Right, you would put a parental advisory on your podcast, and that's going to turn a lot of people off.
Is Jerry Seinfeld any less funny because he doesn't curse? No.
So going back to show prep for a second, I want to ask you guys, and Steve, let's start with you. Have you had a moment that was just surprising to you in your show research or your show prep, that you thought one thing and then in your research you found another?
That's a good question. I do that almost weekly. Like I said, you start off with a broad topic, and as you're narrowing it down, and there's been times where we've started off with what is written on the board, and in the end, that's not what the end podcast was.
Right. And then the surprise moment typically comes when our notes merge, and we'll be like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. We have to make sure that that's in the show because I was unaware of that throughout my research.
Right. You think to yourself, I know this topic, and then as you get into it,
how
you
could
realize
that huge point be there?
How much of the topic you're not aware of.
Right.
And that's what's cool about us translating and doing this research, is that we're able to make the audience aware of those topics, the surprise behind it, and kind of give them what it took us so long to get.
Yeah, because a lot of these, sure, we do shows on that have been lifelong stories in both of our lives, but there's some that from concept to recording, we've only been discussing for a month. So it's almost as brand new to us as it is to the listener, but we hope that we do a good enough job interpreting it for them.
That's well said.
So, Foltz, what about listener and audience feedback? Has anything come from the audience that's really been a surprise to you?
Yeah, and you know what? I actually, I hope she's watching right now. When Steve and I first started off, just like any rookies would, you're testing the waters. So I would say that our pre-show was probably about half as long as our actual show. And we would talk about what the weather was like here and what we were doing and this and that. And this lady from out of state sent me an email one day and basically said, I love your show, your content's great, you guys, you're nailing it. But we can't relate to what's going on with your weather there or what's going on there locally from people from out of state. And as our podcast has grown, we're in over 30 countries now. But at first, you're just like it stings.
It did sting.
Forget the past 20 5-star reviews I just read. What are you talking about? But you know what? I said it to Steve, and he was kind of bitter at first too. But then when we started talking about it, we're like, you know what? She's right. Let's not take the...
It really took a show or two for us, because we discussed the comment, and then in the very next pre-show, we skipped the weather, and we skipped a lot of what we were doing up until that time, and got to the content. And then what we found was, if we can get to the content sooner, then we can get more content in.
Exactly, and that was the point that I was going to make. So our introduction now is maybe a minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes before we jump into content. So that was the biggest constructive criticism that we took via an email from one of our listeners. So if you remember sending that, thank you. It helped our platform immensely.
And to everyone else, please continue to send us comments. because we
send us ideas.
Right, we take that very seriously. We do the show for each other, but we do the show for the audience first and foremost. So if the audience has comments to us, we absolutely listen
Questions,
to them.
comments, concerns.
And this YouTube show is going to be great for that because audience can add comments right now below,
Exactly.
and you can start to process those
Sure.
real time. So I think that's great.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to ask Steve, we'll start with you about is just one of the reasons that you guys are doing this after show is to really engage with the audience, let them see you, let them hear more about the topic. So, with your permission, I want to be able to break down episodes. So going forward, this was a nice get to know you session, but we want to get right into the meat of the research and take and extend the podcast show a little bit further with these shows. So, Steve, how do you feel about that direction and where we're going to go?
I think that an after show like this would be best suited to discuss an individual show and what goes on in that maybe last 5 hours before we launch, or maybe what goes on during recording, because there's things that go on during recording where we'll take a cut, we'll take a stab at something, we won't like it, we'll take another stab at it, we'll work around something. So I think it's good to have that level of definition to the after show. You agree?
I totally agree, and to add on top of that, the after show gives us opportunity, like we were just saying. Remember the phone book that's now this? Well, that gives us an opportunity to expand on the phone book a little bit.
Right. I will say this. There's been so many times that Foltz and I, as we were growing up together, because we grew up together.
Yeah.
We've spent so many hours together. This is before the podcast, where we just sat back and looked up at the sky together and looked at the stars and had these conversations together before. Not in this format, not with microphones and all the equipment that we have now, but this is something that we've been doing for our whole lives together.
Yeah, so it just makes sense. It works.
So we're going to end with a pretty obvious question. I know a lot of the audience members want to know about this. We're going to start with you, Foltz, and it comes down to the name Subtle Beast.
Okay. Well, we get asked this question quite often, and I know people are always looking for this big ta-da moment where it's like, oh, wow, that's great that you came up with it. But actually, it doesn't have the greatest story that everybody wants. Steve had actually pitched the idea as a tribute to my father who had passed away to call the show Steve N Foltz. My father's name was Steve N Foltz, which I loved it, and I was very grateful for it and wanted to use it, but I also wanted something else. I wanted it to be blah, blah, blah with Steve N Foltz.
Right.
And one day I was just literally watching TV. I was on my phone and I heard the word subtle come out of a guy's name. I was like, oh, I like that. How could I play with that? And subtle, and I was thinking we'd always be like, oh, beast. And it came together. I said it to Steve.
Yeah,
he
I loved
liked it
immediately.
And
it's two sides of the coin. I mean, there's a subtleness to what we do. We've definitely towed the line throughout our shows. There is a level of there are lines I think that we don't cross, like the family friendliness. There's a subtlety to what we do, but it's also beast to come out there swinging and put all of the information that we've gathered out there for everyone to hear. So I think that it shows the multi-side, the multiple levels of what we do.
Sure, and people for that are skeptics on our topic as well. It also reflects that, okay, we respect the fact that you're a skeptic, but if there's ever a skeptic podcast out there that wanted to challenge us on our views or what we believe, well, we'll be there. Subtly, but we'll beast through it.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, guys, I really want to thank you for spending
thank
time
you.
on our first ever
Thank
after
you,
show.
Brad.
This was a lot of fun, and we will be back soon with our next episode.
Thank you.